4:20 or thereabouts, so of course it's time for cannabis. And we have Todd Harrison from CB1 Capital. Todd has been around forever, used to be CEO and built Minionville. We know each other from our MarketWatch days or my MarketWatch days. Extremely knowledgeable, and I saw part of this in Stocktoberfest West. It's incredible.
I'm surprised you let me back after I shorted crypto in San Diego. I'm Todd Harrison. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of CB1 Capital. This is my partner, Loren Defalco. He runs our research. And CB1 Capital, we're a healthcare fund. We're not a cannabis fund. And we're going to talk a little bit about why we're approaching the space like this. And we're going to try to leave some time for questions at the end, because I'm sure there's probably some questions at the end. So we'll breeze through this. It's a pretty involved conversation, but we'll try to keep it as tight as possible. So I've been looking to get into the cannabis space for a good decade, and I couldn't identify an advantageous risk reward. And I literally went on TV about 8 years ago and said this is my best idea for the next decade. And I was a little early, and I was also wrong in that I was looking at the crime rate, the prison population, the tax revenue, the job growth, and saying that's a pretty good reason to legalize this. But it wasn't until that I invested in GW Pharmaceuticals a number of years ago, and I started to go down the rabbit hole of cannabinoid research. And I was actually looking for adverse effects, and all I kept finding were benefits from this plant. And it was during that time that I met Loren. We stumbled over each other on Twitter looking for cannabinoids. It turns out he lived about a half hour from me. We met for a coffee, which was great, after I explained to my wife why I was meeting a man who I met on the internet. And tell your story, Loren.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. So I've been involved in finance for the last 20 years, and 10 years ago had a massive seizure coming back from a business trip at a local airport. Basically woke up in an ambulance, didn't know who I was, where I'd come from. It was quite a frightening experience. Ended up going to the neurologist the next day to have an EEG done, and was shown there was seizure activity. And in order to drive my car still to get to work, I had to take seizure meds. Those medications ended up causing me to have all kinds of side effects, and I was prescribed probably about 4 other medications, if I remember correctly at the time. So I was on about 5 medications stacked up, and it caused what I would call a decline in my cognitive abilities. I just couldn't process information the way I used to, and I knew this was not a good long-term solution because I just couldn't function anymore. So looking for a better solution, I found all this research being done overseas in Israel, Italy, Spain, and a host of other countries in regards to this endocannabinoid system. And Todd had mentioned GW Pharmaceuticals, which some of you might have heard recently with the pediatric epilepsy, the committee, if the FDA giving a 13-0 nod, hopefully leading to a thumbs up PDUFA in June. So essentially I took that information, that preclinical information, and applied it to my diet after understanding that omega-3s break down into these same types of substances in your body when you eat them. I also changed my exercise regimen because you start to make these same chemicals in your body when you exercise at certain heart rates. And then I basically took copious amounts of hemp food, regimen of cannabinoids, and less than a year later had another EEG done and was shown that there was no more seizure activity. I was able to get off of all my medication. I've been off of all my medication for 9 years now, no seizures. And I spent that time, as Todd always talks about, this is not about getting high, this is about getting well. And we trademark that because we firmly believe that. Because, talking about this rabbit hole that he mentioned, for the last 9 years, I've taken it from that point of view of looking at this of wellness. So once you start to understand that we make these chemicals in our body, and as we age, and through either environmental, genetic, or other reasons, we stop to make them, and then disease manifests. So there's a huge understanding gap that we're trying to fill in terms of what this actually is. It's about wellness. That's firmly where we are. So,
and him spending 10 years studying cannabinoids is meaningful because this is not, until last semester, this was not taught in medical schools or in universities. There's about 5 schools right now that are teaching cannabinoid wellness. So there's literally about a 4-year clock on right now in terms of the arbitrage of time. We spoke to a lot of genealogists, a lot of scientists, and the mosaic we pulled away from them, as Loren alluded to, is that over the last 100 years, we've gone from hunters and gatherers to desk jobs, and we've gone from organic foods to processed foods and trans fats and chemicals, and obviously heredity plays a part, but all of these unmet medical conditions have percolated over this time, and without getting too much in the weeds, there's an endocannabinoid system in all of us, in human beings, in dogs, cats, plants. It was never discovered until the late 80s, early 90s, so this is literally frontier science, and it's why when we've had this conversation with biotech analysts and pharma analysts and CEOs, they look at us like we're literally on the spectrum because they have no idea what we're talking about. But if you actually do the work and you have an intellectual curiosity and explore this, you'll see that there is definitive efficacy. There's actually efficacious agility to this. This is not just for pain. It's not just for epilepsy. 90 some odd percent of cannabinoids are non-euphoric, right? Not non-psychoactive. They're all psychoactive. CBD, everybody says isn't psychoactive. CBD is psychoactive. It's antipsychotic, but it is not euphoric. 90% of cannabinoids are non-euphoric. The 10%-ish THC, which gets such a bad rap, is doing wonderful things for Alzheimer's and for dementia as they're testing this. And go ahead.
Well, I'll say the one thing about THC that is probably the most misunderstood chemical out there is, you know, they used to believe the runner's high was all endorphins, and we know now after cutting dogs open years ago that this is an endocannabinoid high. So when you're running and you feel really good, and you know, I run all the time, and I know a lot of people here probably too.
I don't run anymore.
So you produce this chemical AEA that is identical in action to THC. Identical in action to THC. So when you run and you feel good, that's that same chemical. Now, THC in an abundance is abusive. You can't take anything in abundance, it becomes abusive. So it's just, you know, people are abusing it, and that's misunderstood. The way to actually get the chemicals out of the plant, we've only had one way, through smoking, because it's been illegal. There are so many other ways, through pills, through patches, through all different methods, and it doesn't have the spike in your plasma that gets you high. It's this low-level dosage, very small amounts that people need. So this is what we're trying to explain to people, because I think most people have this misconception that people are sitting around with these conditions, and you know, some people do smoke, but a lot of this is getting those compounds out. There's 140 of them in this plant that are all unique and different, have all different medical, I mean, CBDV was one GW had in a trial right now for autism. So CBD is one many are familiar with. There's something called CBDV that's in a clinical trial with the FDA right now for autism. So it's just, there's just a lot of misunderstanding out there that we're trying to...
So when I met this character a few years back, we went for a drink and he's telling me this story, I finally met somebody who shared my passion and intellectual curiosity for cannabinoids, right? It was not a part of the lexicon, and nobody really talked about cannabinoids, but you know, after all of these years of trying to find an advantageous risk reward, it dawned on me after we started, you know, talking during the trading day and making money trading, that this could very well be the advantageous risk reward. And I'll try to keep this tight because we do want to take questions, but we look at 4 arbitrages in the market that we're looking to capture. It's an arbitrage of time versus policy. We do believe this is efficacious. We do believe over the next decade or so, it's going to move from drugs from state dispensaries to medicine prescribed by doctors covered by insurance. Germany right now, if you want cannabis and you have a medical condition, you get it from your doctor, you get a prescription, you go to your pharmacy, and you get covered by insurance. That's going to be the model in our opinion. And if medicine in efficacy is not enough reason that this is going to go through the FDA, if you follow the money, the only way the US government can tax cannabis is through the FDA, which is another reason we think that it ultimately goes through there over the course of time. But the second arbitrage, which is probably more pertinent for this discussion, is price. The second is price, right? We think that U.S. institutions, we think high net worth individuals are going to bum rush the space. If institutions don't chase growth, it'll be the first time in my 30-year career that they haven't. And to that end, we've gone to these conferences, we've seen Putnam, Fidelity, Vanguard, all walking around. And now if you pull up a top 5 holder list for all of these Canadian majors, you're going to see Vanguard is a top 5 holder in all of these stocks, and we think that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the future layer of demand coming through. But the most important divergence or discrepancy in our opinion is perception. And we always tell the story about how there are some on the right that think this is the devil's weed. There are some on the left that thinks it's fun to smoke a joint on a Saturday night. But all of us, if somebody that we love is suffering and somebody we love needs help, we want to give them the best care we can with the least amount of side effects. And that's why we believe everybody's going to come together for this issue. It's one of the few bipartisan issues, and we talked about this last year. Everyone said, well, why are you doing this? Why now? And we said 2018, and we talked about this in San Diego, this year is different. It's an election year, and you have 96% of the constituency supporting medical marijuana, and if the Republicans didn't try to steal this issue in the last couple of weeks, the Democrats were going to run away with the midterm elections, in our opinion. So you saw John Boehner, you saw Mitch McConnell, you saw Donald Trump all come out and try to steal this issue from the Democrats in front of the election, and we think it's going to happen. And the fourth one for our strategy, the arbitrage, is liquidity. Rather than a private equity fund where you're hoping the guy after you is going to value it more, you're hoping the strategy works. We are well diversified across about 25 positions, no more than 5% each. We trade in Australia, we trade in Canada, we trade in US, and it's not just the cultivators, biofarm, consumer goods, extraction, laboratories. All of this is going to come around, and there's massive inefficiencies right now. After Sessions pulled the Cole memorandum, we bought back a stock 70% cheaper than it was the day before. It's all retail holders. You have no Wall Street analysts defending these stocks. You have no institutions holding these stocks, and we think that's about to change in a big way.
Yeah, we BMO stepped in, I think a couple of weeks ago, put an analyst on. They're having a conference. They're having a conference next week. So BMO finally, after a while being pushed back, they're finally getting in. TD's been heavily involved. There's a debt financing deals that are coming through now. So things are changing.
And I do want to give a few tickers, and it's only going to be a few because we don't like to give tickers. I've done this for a long time in the financial media community, and it's a lot better if you actually do the work and learn the science and understand the thesis. But we do think a few companies are real attractive here. There's an Australian company, Auscan, ACNNF is the ticker in the US, AC8 in Australia. They have a deal with Canopy right now. That's one we like. We're overweight US right now. Ianthus, ITHUF is a name that we like there. TerraTech, TRTC is a name we like. Liberty Health Science got absolutely demolished when it got spun off from Africa. That's a name that we like. So the way we're running the strategy is we're just staying long cannabinoid wellness. We own about 10 million shares of stock right now, and against that, with 5% of our book, we like to do things like buy Q put spreads and and short some of the other sectors that we think are ahead of their skis. And I happen to think tech is peak FANG is behind us, and I may be right, I may be wrong, but I want to own cannabis or cannabinoid wellness where it is in the cycle against tech where it is in the cycle. I think this over the next decade you're going to see those switch. If there are any questions, we're happy to take questions. There's no questions. Oh, yes.
Yeah, Hawthorne. The Hawthorne division is interesting. So he's asking about Scott's Miracle-Gro and hydroponics, and the smaller scale ones that are middlemen, we have a hard time looking down the road and seeing how, we know the larger LPs up in Canada are all mixing their own nutrients together. They're going direct, so a lot of these middlemen don't make as much sense. Hawthorne and within Scott's is interesting. They're really trying to go after the sector, so that's something for sure to watch. It's a smaller portion of Scott's, but they feel that they want to get heavily involved in this. And once what we believe is coming down the pike with Munchin saying recently about the banking issue being resolved, once these things start to get resolved, we've spoken to enough people knowing they're waiting for a couple things.
I mean, this is one that people bought as a proxy for cannabis because there really was nothing else. But, in the absence of water, people are so thirsty they drink the sand. There's going to be a lot of water soon, and there's going to be a lot of liquidity with that water. See what I did there? One other thing, we talked about GW for anybody who's involved. Just know, we're very excited about the epilepsy, where we're actually looking through that. They have brain cancer data that we think is going to come out in ASCO in June. It's a fantastic story. Last February 2017, they had phase 2 glioma trials, which is brain cancer. They couldn't release secondary endpoints because too many people were still surviving. That was 14 months ago.
And they beat primary endpoint they did beat primary.
So I think why this is important is because everybody's sort of looking at this and say, okay, well, maybe it works for epilepsy. But when you start pulling in cancer and you start talking about dementia and Alzheimer's, and people start to understand that there's a lot of different ways you can use this, and pretty much 90% of them aren't going to get you high, we think that the perception is going to arrive, like the point of recognition is going to arrive like a clap of thunder, and this is going to just take off. Yep. I think we're up for time, so thank you very much.
Thank you.